Rosalba Icaza, Professor of Global Politics, Feminisms and Decoloniality at the Institute of Social Studies, Erasmus University Rotterdam. And Rosalba is a decolonial feminist activist scholar with 15 years of research and teaching in this area. Secondly, we have Dastan Kamanzi, a Pan-Africanist, Executive Director of the Tanzania Media Foundation, and he's developed a philosophy called the Tija Human Person Philosophy, which he's going to tell us more about. And then thirdly, Alice Feldman, activist, educator, art maker, researcher in the School of Sociology in University College Dublin. And she's been working in the context of knowledge justice projects across university, civic, and grassroots landscapes for over 20 years. So it's a really wonderful combination. And I'm just, delighted to first welcome Rosalba to share. So Rosalba, if you want to come on and begin, yeah.
So first of all, thank you everyone for this invitation. It's really an honor to be surrounded by people concerned with education and I will say learning. I'm coming here mainly as a teacher. I'm an academic, but I'm also a teacher concerned with how we learn from each other in the context of the classroom. And having said that, I'm going to share with you some key concepts, key ideas that might sound a little bit abstract, but nonetheless are very much grounded on what maestra and mentora and friend Maria Lugones used to call and conceptualize as practical thinking. And practical thinking is something very concrete. It invites us to not think what we don't do. So it might sound a little bit abstract, but the concepts that I'm going to share with you are contexts that emerge from concrete practices. And I'm sharing them in the spirit of having a common language that later on can help us to navigate through the other presentations, but also through the questions that might emerge in this process, okay? So let me start by sharing that the way I'm going to speak about decoloniality is, of course, contextualize. If something is contrary to the decolonial option, is try to universalize what is decoloniality. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit of why now we are speaking and my institution in the context in which I'm based, that is in the Netherlands, and why, not only why now, but how we are speaking about and practicing decoloniality. And if there is a space and time in my presentation, I might go a little bit into the concrete engagements and practices of decoloniality in the institution where I'm currently based. And if not, it can come up during the conversation that is planned after the presentations. Okay, so from where are we speaking today on decoloniality? From where I am reaching to all of you to try to share with you my ideas and my practice on decoloniality. First of all, it's very important that we position where are we speaking, and we are speaking from within debates in European higher education institutions, which are challenging Westernized universities as a global colonial project. It will be a completely different starting point if we were, for example, in Aviala, or if we were working with communities, defending land grabbing, and other processes of destitution. So I want us to be very, very concrete and very clear that we are, talking from a very specific context, and that is also going to, at least in my presentation, shape the way I'm addressing all of you today. But I'm also speaking to you today from an interest in understanding the entanglements between demands for the decolonization of universities here in the global north and ongoing struggles for social, epistemic, and earth justice in the global south. These are not disconnected. But I'm also speaking from an aspiration to build up coalitions with Black radical praxis, Chicane, global south abolitionists, and communitarian territorial feminisms. Decoloniality in higher education in the global north is now what I understand part of the conversations on the decolonization of universities. Now, in order to be clear about how I'm understanding, and I'm talking to you today, I need to go a little bit back to the basics and to explain to you what is my understanding of decoloniality. So let me start by saying that decoloniality had its origins in Latin America and entered academia as a critical inquiry concerned with coloniality. So decoloniality, when we speak about decoloniality, we are referring, or I am referring to the movement away from coloniality. The focus on this movement away from coloniality is in itself a turn to an epistemic or cognitive south in the reconstitution of global political societies, as Walter Mignolo used to say. But then, what is coloniality? Coloniality is a short way of speaking about the colonial matrix of power, la matriz moderna colonial de poder, a term coined by Aníbal Quijano from Peru. And coloniality, in this sense, is related to colonialism, but is not colonialism. The latter refer to the political control over territories by imperial powers. Coloniality, in the sense of Aníbal Quijano, is a globalized system of oppression that unfolds through a complex set of matrices of control and domination, and now you are looking into those matrices of control and domination. Coloniality operates in the spheres of politics, economy, being, gender, sexuality, subjectivity, knowledge, environment, interlinking, mutually constituting systems of oppression. For example, in politics and authority, with the invention of race and racialization as a technology of control. In the economy, via the establishment of markets and private property that justify the exploitation and the lesser value of reproductive and caring activities. In the arena of ontology or being, with the creation of the category human as separate from nature and over-representing men with big M, as Sylvia Winter understands it, representing white men. In the arena of sexuality, with the imposition of biological binaries and gender as a form of classification and domination. In the arena of knowledge, via the centrality of human rationality imposed as common sense. And in the arena of environment, with its reduction to nature and nature as a resource. Now, decoloniality, as I have just mentioned to you, enters academic debates in the global north with a perspective on modernity as coloniality, articulated in its basic proposition that there is no modernity without coloniality. A decolonial perspective understands modernity as being 3 centuries older than its commonly accepted historiography suggests. So this means that the study of modernity is displaced from the 19th to the 15th and 16th century, the time of the conquest of the Americas in 1492 and the control of the Atlantic. In this sense, what we know as Western modernity is not solely a product of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, or the Industrial Revolution, but a product of colonization, slavery, and genocide. Modernity as a phenomenon that is 3 centuries older reveals the moment in which Europe, as a civilizational project, claimed universality for itself, producing all other cultures as particular, other, subaltern, backward, etc. Decoloniality has also been defined as a liberatory praxis that emerged from First Nations and communities and Afro-descendant people in Aviala, the Americas, and their struggles for political autonomy and land restitution. For still some others, decoloniality is a political imperative of transformation towards decolonization, as the undoing of coloniality of power, knowledge, gender, being. In a nutshell, decoloniality points at the complexity of desprendimiento, of delinking and healing from coloniality. Now, in the context of development studies where I'm based institutionally and the context of international education, my research understands coloniality as 3 particular movements, historical movements. I hope that you can see. And when I was speaking about the movement in the way in which in academia we refer to decoloniality, I was showing this particular slide in which I tend to represent that modernity cannot be understood without its coloniality, without its underside, and all the victories or all the celebratory elements of modernity that we can relate to human rights, to equality, and so forth, cannot be understood without its underside. That is colonialism, imperial historical movements, concrete historical movements that I have written about and I constantly teach about. And these are three particular losses. Is the loss of, this is for me, the way I normally teach and refer to coloniality in the context of development, international development and international education. Why? Because by focusing on understanding these losses, it is possible to highlight that not everyone experiences modern education and its dominant modern lineal idea of change and self-actualization equally. My current research on decolonial research pedagogies proposes concrete forms of countering these losses within the most radical space that still exists, from my point of view, within universities, that is the classroom. How it's being implemented in my current institution. So I will leave it here, Sive, in order to give a space to the rest of the speakers.
Okay, thank you so much. Now it's my time. Okay, I've been already introduced. I'm Dastan Kamanzi from Tanzania, East Africa. Here is the afternoon. So maybe I go direct. Thank you, Rosalba, if I pronounce well your name. It was very interesting to hear from you, and I have learned a lot. I've added something on my presentation. So the topic is already known, and so I will represent this based on the CSA. The CSA means the concept, situation, and the approach. So I don't need to go into details on my bio because I know the idea shared you already. So my background is I studied philosophy and I'm very much interested in philosophy, but again, I'm a Pan-Africanist as they introduced me. I'm very much concerned with the situation of Africa as it fits in the global environment. So today I'm going to share with you some of my understanding on the concept of coloniality and the coloniality. And again, I will show you the situation, some of the situations which reflect the coloniality in Africa. And I will show you the approach as a Pan-Africanist thought and came up with in addressing coloniality. And I use this approach at the Tanzania Media Foundation, and this is a foundation which is promoting good journalism or journalism and investigative journalism in Tanzania. So begin with the concept. I know Rosalba has defined the coloniality and decoloniality, and therefore I will not go into details, but I will tell you that my understanding with coloniality is the form and the process of dehumanization and oppression. Now, I think even the word dehumanization needs to be defined. Dehumanization is defined as the process of depriving a person or group of people their human qualities or attributes. And this can be done through language, behavior, or policies. So dehumanization, when you reduce somebody or a human person from being a full human and name or give names like savage or barbarian, so that is you are dehumanized. And so the coloniality is the opposite of coloniality, is actually the form of, or the process of humanization. Now, the process of seeing a human person as a full human person without degrading that human person. And so here we talk of equality and empowerment and justice and dignity of all humankind. And coloniality actually is characterized by, in terms of education, you find education which prepares people to not reason, to not come up with some reasoning, but just the people who are the yes people, people who do not critically think and come up with critical ideas or transformative ideas. It is a kind of education of domination. So decoloniality is a difference from the coloniality. So here I say it's characterized by education for self-reliance, where people can rely on themselves, and problem-posing education and education for freedom. So you can see the difference between coloniality and decoloniality. So now the situation in Africa. So coloniality being the system which actually can be traced from the colonial era, and it is still running today in the systems of education systems and even politics and everywhere. And for you will get this slide, you will read the words of our first president in Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, was writing this education for self-reliance, his document on this education for self-reliance. He was expressing the way the Tanzanians and the Africans were oppressed, were degraded. And now he mentioned our weakness. Now here I say our weakness of being oppressed by the coloniality or the system is nowhere else but in our minds, our self-concept, which was shaped by colonialism. And it is also a reflection of the education system, which actually, for instance, in Africa or Tanzania, we actually inherited the colonial system of education. And so you find in Tanzania or in Africa, the education system is actually preparing students or Tanzanians or Africans to be like recipients. This is actually the system of education which is referred to as a banking kind of education, where the teacher is just depositing the knowledge in the minds without preparing someone to be a critical thinker. So this has affected us a great deal, and it has made Africans to be dependent and depending instead of self-reliant. So I don't need to talk much about this. Maybe you know, most of the aids come from abroad, from the West, to help Africans. While we have all the resources, we have all what we need to be developed. So it is because of the colonial systems of education. Now, being concerned with this kind of education, the way we are brought up and the way we learn from school, my question came to be like, why are Africans leaving so much the resources, but we still depend on aids, depend on external donation? Yes, they are very important, but we have all the resources. So why is this situation? Now I came to understand it was the effects of slavery, colonialism, and everything. So I thought like we need to apply what I call the pre-colonial education approach, which our forefathers were applying in educating their young. Now here, I know maybe will not suffice, but I can show you very, very quickly Now I came up with this thinking, which I call teacher human person. I started visualizing a human person. Now there is a difference between a human person and a human being. Human being is like the hardware, but the software is a person who is installed in this body. Now I talk of a teacher human person, not a teacher human being. So this is the mind. Now you look here, I define this teacher human person as a person who purposefully applies expertise. Now you will see knowledge of the mind, skills, and the hands in time. Now the aspect of time to produce products, goods, and services of value to human life. And you will note this self-sector and society is not just focusing on yourself, but focusing on self-sector of your interests and society as a whole. So when we say you are a teacher human person, you exist, you see this number one, you exist as an individual person who exists between solutions and challenges. And while there, operating in time, you solve the challenges because you see C is the half of S, and then the solution is the half, the challenge is the half of S, or solutions. So a human person is there to solve challenges and to change the C into S and operating in time. So this human figure you see here is as some levels, the 9 levels of both the mind or the person grows from stage 1 to stage 9. By doing that, producing products. The meaning of teacher means being productive. You are producing ideas, producing products of value to the society. So the approach, the African approach, is the experienced people with skills and knowledge and wisdom. We're transferring these skills and knowledge to the young generation who were expected to participate in development of the future society. So with this approach, we take the most experienced, the elders in the community, in the society, and the people with experience in a given field to nurture. Now we are talking of nurturing, to nurture the young with the practical and the theoretical approaches so that they can be able to address challenges which we are facing in Africa and in Tanzania and become, at the end of the day, independent, self-reliant. So the approach we use in nurturing, we call it work-learn systems, the work-learn system, where we talk of work, learn, and earn. Now, the colonial system taught us starting with learning instead of working, but the pre-colonial approach was starting with working. Working and learning, they go together. You can't separate them. But nowadays, we attend school, we stay there for 3 or 7 years, learning theoretical knowledge, and then we go back to work. But for this approach is that working and learning, they go together. So as you work and learn and work, so you earn products, you can earn a position in your society, and you can earn results of change. So this is in short is the approach we are using, and we apply it. For today, I can't share how the results or whatever, but this is the approach we think we see it is being beneficial to our people. And finally, this teacher human person, the THP clock, we operate in time because a human person is defined by time and lives and operates in time. So the challenges are addressed in time, and we look for solutions in time. So this is the clock. Maybe it can be a subject of another time. So actually, in short, this is the philosophy. Maybe you will have some questions to ask me regarding this. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Alice Feldman, and I'll just start talking about what I'm going to start talking about. Okay, so just I suppose my, oh no, it's not working. Here we are. This is my provocation for today. and it's one that I've been working with for a while. But what happens when we conceive of knowledge justice as a matter of global justice? Not just maybe one of the topics or issues, but that the two are literally sort of mapped onto each other and implicated in each other. And so a lot of times when we are mobilizing for justice, we're not necessarily embedding it in these wider histories and inheritances. And I want to thank Rosalba and Dastan, because what I'm saying is very much, I think the three of us, it's sort of, you get a bit of a mosaic of key issues spoken in different ways because they're lived in different ways. And I think that's one of the really important things about decoloniality, is that context of embodied knowledge, and we're all embedded in different histories, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we are bodies moving for justice, and you often find the phrase the geo and body politics of knowledge. Okay, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think I kind of went with that and started looking at that in practice. So one person that whose work has really inspired me is Sabelo and Lovu-Gatsheni, and he observes the issue of a global knowledge crisis. And just a short quote from him. And he says, what the world is facing is a broad civilizational crisis. And remember how Rosalba and Dastan were talking about when modernity announces itself as the universal civilizational crisis or civilizational model or truth. And we're talking, and I joined them in where the historical narrative starts 500 years ago with Euro white supremacist conquest and the colonial structures that came out of that to reproduce that. But he says, so the world is facing a broad civilizational crisis, which loudly proclaims that modernity has produced many modern problems for which it has no modern solutions. So we're stuck in a particular knowledge world of Anglo-Eurocentric knowledge. And he draws a sort of parallel. He says the systemic crises, financial breakdown, climate breakdown, these systemic planetary crises are equaled by or in parity with a series of knowledge crises. And epistemic or epistemology is for now just a handy word for knowledge. Okay, so when we talk about epistemic justice, epistemic crises, we're talking about the crisis of knowledge. So systemic and epistemic. And, this is all part of the work that we do, looking at words, looking at their genealogies, looking at where and how we use the language that we do and all the baggage that it brings with it. And then how to, I suppose, balancing how do you create new language and new vocabularies to bring us beyond and help us reimagine without getting too much lost in jargon, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very much a fine balance. But I think one thing that we all, the three of us, do really well is we bring it into practice. So he looks at this parity of systemic and knowledge crises. And he sort of announces that, there's a deficit of knowledge diversity. And you can ask yourself, well, how could you have a deficit of diversity? Peoples all around the world. And so, again, using a lot of the language that Rosalba mentioned, many scholars are starting to use the word epistemicide. So very much like the word genocide, but it's the eradication of knowledges. So if genocide is the eradication of the physical spaces and bodies of knowledge holders, right? You are eradicating the sources and the ways of lives that carry on to produce or from which new knowledges are coming from. And again, just, reiterating too what they were saying, the notion of declaring people as non-human, if you're not human, right? Non-humans are non-knowers, that they carry no knowledge, they make no knowledge, they contribute no knowledge. And the German philosopher Hegel goes as far as, hundreds of years ago, and one of our modernist friends he declared the entire continent of Africa as people without history. And two books really important, Mudimbi's The Invention of Africa and Enrique Dussel's The Invention of the Americas, take us back, as Rosalba was saying, to coloniality and conquest as the start of this narrative. However, it's not perhaps the deficit of knowledge diversity, but it's the geopolitics of knowledge that limits the circulation of knowledges that we do have, the diversity that we do have. And he says, there could never be only one center from which to view the world, but that different people in the world had their culture and environment at the center. The relevant question is therefore how one center relates to other centers. So again, the universalization of the Anglo-Eurocentric supremacist worldview takes up the whole space of the knowledge world, right? And what Ngugi, here we are. And what Ngugi argues for is this notion of moving the center, right? And there's a whole discussion around the creation of global structures of knowledge inequalities, the way the global north, the dominion of the Eurocentric view, but also the way the global north structures, whether it's curricula, whether it's measurements of excellence, whether what gets published and the biases in favor of Western global north, European knowledges, the way that it controls that dominion. So Ngugi talks about moving the center of Eurocentrism, decentering the center of Eurocentrism, and where the work comes is it's very entangled. So moving more, and another sort of main critical coordinate for me in the decolonial ways and options of doing things is the focus on relationalities, as opposed to whether individual identities or an individual reading list or piece of something on a reading list or an organizational practice. It's the relationality within this whole wider, longer global history of colonial inheritances. And so lots of people are, the term pluriverse, okay, that's the illumination of multiple knowledge worlds as they exist through people's lives and bodies, and lands and ways of learning and ways of passing that knowledge on. So for me, pluriversality, okay, as opposed to universality, pluriversality is decolonial, but also a decolonizing ethics, right? But also a process. It's one thing to say that there are multiple knowledge worlds everywhere, all over, but how do we connect with them? And how do we do this in a way that honors the integrity of where and how the knowledge comes from, how it's taught, how it's lived, okay, embodied, lived knowledge, right? How does that become pedagogies? And how do they move? How do they travel, right? And the way that I talk about this thing is, people say, well, what is a lens, or what is some sort of guide or something for how do I make decisions? How do I find out what work should I be doing? How do I, in the practice of sort of a decolonial way of imagining process and imagining the work of unlearning, reimagining, and re-existing, which is an idea from Adolfo Alban Cinte, re-existing, going beyond just resisting and working against the grain or trying to push the limits of existing structures, but re-existing. So there's a lot of work in this, right? And for me, I'm all about, beyond the syllabus, but I'm all about, oh, I'm missing a slide. Oh, here it is. Oh, I skipped this one, but it's actually kind of working. Okay, so I'm all about this. And, these questions around whose knowledge counts, in what ways, under what circumstances, with whom. These questions are not new questions. These are old questions. I mean, for me and my own sort of journey, came out of the 60s of development education critiques, Paulo Freire's work on critical pedagogy. So in a sense, what we're looking at in terms of doing decolonial work or practices or decolonizing imperatives, moving away and trying to unentangle from this heavy weight literally woven into the social fabric of everyday existence, right? These aren't new questions, right? And I think, everyone, I mean, Freire's work is very well known, right? But what is the decolonial difference? What I would call the decolonial sort of tweak on this is, I think I would argue that Freire's ideas traveled and were brought or taken north into the classroom. But the rest of what was happening at the time when he was writing, what was happening in Latin America, what were the social and political and cultural and historical and colonial inheritances that shaped, from which his creation of his ideas were born, right? That stuff didn't make the trip, because there would have been this sort of, I suppose, kind of cherry picking without bringing what are the colonial inheritances? Where is Europe in all of this? How do we take these ideas, but make it do the work, the knowledge justice work that was envisioned by the person who was doing it? And how do we, I would say, how are we epistemically accountable, right? We want new knowledges, we want new ideas, but how are we ethically, morally, capacity-wise, how are we accountable to the conditions and all that knowledge brings? So I'm probably way over. So I'm just going to move to the last bit here, right? So everything for me originates from the knowledge makers and the knowledge and the learners, makers and learners and carriers of knowledge. And you have all of these interrelated, whether it's curriculum, whether it's hiring, whether it's this or it's that. But I guess what I want, and this comes back to Sive's provocation at the beginning of looking at the cup, right? So what and how does being a global citizen mean? What is global citizenship? How do we do global education? What kind of knowledge, whether you're an individual instructor, educator, activist, what is my knowledge project? What do I have to do to engage in these types of transformation? And I always use the phrase, what work do we need to do in order to do the work, which is this unlearning, reimagining, and re-existing. And, you know, maybe someday we might have a session where we can talk about how each of us, or even like a forum for talking about the practice, because we all work at so many different levels and so many contexts and so many different ways of creating. So that's me.